Madam Deputy Speaker, and I'm grateful for the opportunity to come to this House to talk about our vital national effort on personal protective equipment. Colleagues must cast their minds back to where we were 3 years ago, as we stood on the precipice of a global health emergency, the likes of which had not been seen for over a century. SARS-CoV-2 was not even called COVID-19 by this point. I will in a moment. And little was known about its impact and transmission. And in a matter of a few short weeks, this novel coronavirus pushed global health systems and global PPE supply chains to near breaking point. Yet here at home, from a standing start, we initiated work on one of the toughest logistical challenges ever undertaken in peacetime, the provision of PPE for frontline colleagues in health and social care.
At the beginning of the pandemic, in one of my first Prime Minister's questions, I asked the then Prime Minister if he would ensure that profiteering would have no place in this government's response to the COVID pandemic. And now fast forward all these years later, and that seems to have been at the very heart. And the question that I have for him is that the British people were told that this government was helping them. British industry was told that they were going to be supported. Well, I have been persisting in my questions about how the domestic diagnostic industry has been promised work by this government, and they are being charged for doing the right thing. Will he apologise to...
Yeah, thank you.
Well, Madam Deputy Speaker, I'll come on to many of the points that the honourable gentleman raises, but I will just say about UK supply chains. At the beginning of the pandemic, only 1% of PPE used in the UK was produced here. At present, 3/4 of the FFP3 masks provided to the NHS and social care are now manufactured in the United Kingdom, and contracts were signed with around 30 UK-based companies to manufacture around 3.9 billion items of PPE. I will in a moment. Now, Madam Deputy, I'll just make some progress, and I will come to colleagues. Now, colleagues will recall those early days. Planes turned around on the tarmac, countries imposing export bans, a huge inflation in global prices, and the price of crucial items like gloves increasing sixfold. Now, these were the conditions under which tough decisions were taken. These were the decisions under which PPE was procured. And these were the conditions, Madam Deputy Speaker, under which we stepped up to protect our most vulnerable and save lives.
Very grateful for giving way. But how does he possibly square the fact that ARCO, a leading clinical PPE supplier to the NHS since its very inception, has existed in Hull for more than 100 years, didn't get a sniff at any contract from the Department of Health because they weren't anywhere near a VIP lane? The Minister should be saying sorry at the dispatch box. Not all this nonsense. Just fess up. Say sorry.
Well, Madam Deputy Speaker, there were lots of words there and lots of aggression, and I'll come on to address some of the... Well, let's be frank, there was. Let's come on to many of those points, because the honourable gentleman, I fear, forgets the pressure under which civil servants were working at the time and the pace at which decisions had to be taken. And if the honourable gentleman would like to write me with those exact conditions...
Order. The honourable gentleman. Order. The honourable gentleman must allow the Minister to answer. It's not fair just to shout back as soon as he starts answering. Minister.
The honourable gentleman will know that civil servants had to take decisions about speed and pace and quantity. They were looking at contracts that would get the most amount of PPE for the best value of money as quickly as possible. I'll take my honourable friend's intervention.
I'm very grateful to my honourable friend for giving way. Was everything that was done perfectly? No, and all lessons will be learned, I've no doubt. But he does make, I think, the point which all of us would be well advised to try and remember, because it is now quite a long time ago, the absolute panic and fear. The whole world was trying to buy this stuff at any price that they could get hold of it. And if we neglect that, if we neglect to remember the doctors and the nurses and the care home operators in our constituencies who were knocking on our doors asking for emergency help, then then we can't have a proper debate about this issue.
Madam Deputy, my honourable friend is absolutely right. And under those circumstances, in those conditions, we had to be quick and decisive to protect colleagues on the front line so that they could continue providing life-saving care. But with lives on the line, Madam Deputy Speaker, of course, we had to change our approach to procurement and adjust our appetite for risk. And I don't believe, I will in a moment, but I don't believe, Madam Deputy Speaker, as my honourable friend just said, that the British people would have forgiven us if we'd stuck to the same old processes. We had to balance the risk of contracts not performing and supplies being sold at a premium against the real risk, Madam Deputy Speaker, of harm to the health of frontline workers, the NHS and the public if we failed.
Opposition want to have it both ways. They're criticising us for procurement decisions. As I mentioned earlier, they recommended a football agent to supply ventilators, and the same Serco company that they criticise us for having procured PPE from, the Welsh Labour government also procured PPE from.
Well, Madam Deputy Speaker, I'm keen not to get into a political slanging match on this exact point. But where my honourable friend is right is that all members across this House were receiving multiple emails from people who were, as my honourable friend points out, they were panicking because they wanted to ensure that we were procuring that PPE equipment as quickly as possible. So, Madam Deputy Speaker, colleagues across government and beyond work day and night taking tough decisions to keep our country safe. Those efforts secured billions of items. Now, I'm going to come to civil servants in a moment, and forgive me if I won't give way, Madam Deputy Speaker.
I think the Minister has indicated that he will give way in shortly. So I think let him make a bit of progress. Minister.
Interesting comment, Madam Deputy Speaker. I've actually given way equally to both sides so far in this debate. And there is some reluctance, Madam Deputy Speaker, for me to give way to members who tell other members to sit down whilst they are speaking or making interventions. But, Madam Deputy Speaker, I will later. I said I would and I will. But those efforts of the civil servants secured billions of items, and by June 2020 we'd obtained 30,000 ventilators and delivered more than 17.5 billion items of PPE to protect frontline workers. Now, what does this mean in practice, Madam Deputy Speaker? That we were able to keep our NHS open throughout the pandemic. It meant emergency operations went ahead. And once some of the toughest restrictions were eased, it also meant that relatives could visit their loved ones in and around care homes. I will give way.
I thank the Minister for giving way. I just want to take the Minister back to where he mentioned civil servants. According to the government's own records, civil servants were begging ministers not to give contracts to some of these companies because they had red flags. They were overcharging the government almost double the price that they agreed to be paid, which was an extra cost of £50 million to the taxpayers. So civil servants themselves were begging the government not to act in the corrupt manner that they did.
I'm actually very pleased that the Honourable Lady made that intervention, because that's the first I've ever heard such an accusation made. And if the Honourable Lady has evidence of such, I suggest that she presents it. And it might be helpful, Madam Deputy Speaker, if I just talk through the process. Thousands of companies made offers. Around 430 were processed through the high priority lane. Only 12% of those resulted in a contract. Due diligence was carried out on all companies. Due diligence carried out by civil servants. Financial accountability sat with a senior civil servant, and ministers, this is important, Madam Deputy Speaker, ministers were not involved in the decision-making process, and it was a team of over 400 civil servants that processed referrals and undertook due diligence tests. I will come in just one moment. Now, so on that basis, Madam Deputy Speaker, we'll make no apology for procuring PPE at the pace and volume that we did. And now that the global market for PPE has stabilised, I know it's easy for some people to point to the value of goods that are inevitably now sold at a much lower price than we paid. It is a cheap shot, Madam Deputy Speaker, and it is one that entirely misses the point. Now, we adjusted down the value of our PPE holding as market prices have changed. That is just standard accounting practice. And even then, we're still putting large quantities of it to use. And, Madam Deputy Speaker, our successes should be judged on the conditions we faced at the height of the pandemic, not with the convenient benefit of hindsight. Now, let me come to civil servants. And if I may give the Right Honourable Lady the benefit of my fast approaching 4 years' experience as a minister. We rely, Madam Deputy Speaker, on hard-working civil servants. They are the backbone of our state, and it is my privilege to work with them. And the Right Honourable Lady, Madam Deputy Speaker, she knows that ministers were not involved in the decision-making process for PPE procurement. And the due diligence, as I've said, was undertaken by a team of over 400 civil servants. Now, although I'm a health minister now, I wasn't at the time, and I remember, Madam Deputy Speaker, as a minister at the Department for Work and Pensions, how hard civil servants worked under the most trying conditions during the pandemic. And those four, I promise I will come to Honourable Lady, those 400 civil servants working on PPE and a senior accounting officer took decisions at pace and under huge pressure as lives depended on them. Did they get everything right? No, but they did try their best in a highly competitive global market with significant challenges in sourcing, procuring and distributing PPE. Yes, they absolutely did. And I would just very, very gently say to the Right Honourable Lady that her implied criticism of their professionalism, integrity and independence at a time of crisis now, Madam Deputy Speaker, with the convenience and luxury of hindsight, is deeply regrettable, of course.
I think the Minister is being disingenuous to say that. I've never suggested for one moment that civil servants do not do an excellent job and work diligently in their work. But why won't the Minister publish the documents and the emails about what ministers and what Tory peers and what Tory MPs have been up to during the pandemic and these contracts? Thank you.
I'll come to that. As I said, due diligence was carried out on all companies. Procurement decisions were taken by civil servants. Financial accountability sat with a senior civil servant. So, of course, that is what the Right Honourable Lady is praising. And look, Madam Deputy Speaker, I thank and applaud our hard-working civil servants, and I would humbly suggest, Madam Deputy Speaker, that someone aspiring to be our Deputy Prime Minister should do the same and not seek to throw them under the metaphorical bus.
Thank the Health Minister for giving way. Very early on, the Public Accounts Committee and the National Audit Office was looking into this issue. We know it was a rush at the beginning, but we were warning early on, and the problems persisted. The poor record keeping, frankly, lack of record keeping in many cases. But we gave this House gave the government permission to act fast, but not to act fast and loose. And the Minister just needs to acknowledge that.
Well, Madam Deputy Speaker, I thank the Right Honourable Lady for her intervention. I'm going to come on a little bit to some of the action that we're going to take. But the Right Honourable Lady rightly mentions accountability, and it's an important point. Details of the high priority lane were published on the 17th of November 2021 and updated in February 2022. Now, it's an important point, Madam Deputy Speaker, because the Right Honourable Lady, the Deputy Leader of the Opposition, suggests that there is some kind of cover-up. Well, if there is, Madam Deputy Speaker, listen to this, because this is some kind of cover-up. So, high priority lane details published on the 17th of November and updated in February of this year. The National Audit Office has written 3 reports specifically about PPE. The Public Accounts Committee has held a number of evidence sessions. The Boardman Review has taken place into procurement, and we are implementing their findings in full. The independent public inquiry into the government's handling of the pandemic is ongoing. Now, of course, there are lessons that we have to learn and can and should learn, Madam Deputy Speaker, but there is clear accountability in this process. Now, Madam Deputy Speaker, as I mentioned civil servants, I want to put on record my thanks to the 400 civil servants who worked tirelessly to source deals from around the globe, buying PPE to the highest standards and quality, and yes, for the best value for the time. But it wasn't only them, Madam Deputy Speaker, it was a true team effort, one that was made possible through some incredible collaborations, including everyone from industry to the NHS, social care providers, to our armed forces. They all played their part, and they played it well. Now, turning, Madam Deputy Speaker, to unsuitable PPE or potential fraud. It is a simple truth, Madam Deputy Speaker, that 97% 97% of all PPE we ordered was suitable and fit for use, with only a small proportion of the billions of items procured deemed unsuitable. Now, where that has been the case, Madam Deputy Speaker, we are actively seeking to recover costs from suppliers, and we're working to maximise the value from our stockpiles, including using PPE in other settings outside of our NHS. Equally, in those rare instances where there have been allegations of fraud, my department's anti-fraud unit has worked quickly to investigate and moved to recover costs. Now, with respect to some of the specific points raised in today's motions, from the thousands of companies that made offers, around 430, as I have said, were processed through the high priority lane, and only 12% of them, Madam Deputy Speaker, resulted in a contract award. Now, the Right Honourable Lady knows that all contracts went through the same due diligence process, regardless of the source of the offer. And she also knows, Madam Deputy Speaker, that the NAO has written 3 reports about PPE, and the Public Accounts Committee has heard a number of hearings. And the Right Honourable Lady would like me to go, I know, into the detail of individual contracts. But she knows, Madam Deputy Speaker, she even alluded to it, that my department is engaged in commercially sensitive mediation with the relevant companies with a view to resolving the issue without recourse to formal legal action. Now, responding specifically to the terms of the motion, the Government is committed to releasing information when all investigations are concluded. Our response will necessarily take into account the wider public interest and the commercially sensitive nature of the material. It is only right, Madam Deputy Speaker, that we work with the Public Accounts Committee on the terms on which information might be shared. And I understand the Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster will soon begin a dialogue with the Chair of the PAC on how we enact those information sharing arrangements.
I thank the Health Minister for giving way again, and I would just like to reassure him and the House that the Public Accounts Committee is responsible and not reckless. The Public Accounts Committee has previously received papers from this House, and we have a very well-established protocol of receiving and dealing with those papers. And the committee is a trusted committee. We never leak. Well, if we decide to publish, that is a choice that we would make, but it is a responsible decision that we would take.
I thank the Right Honourable Lady for that response, and I know the Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster will soon begin that dialogue with her. I have given way once before.
The Honourable Lady shouldn't be on her feet when the Minister is answering an intervention from the Right Honourable Lady at the back, because quite simply she's getting in the way of the dialogue. That's not the polite way to do it, right? If her intervention is going to be taken, it will be taken in due course. Standing up for a long time when there's another dialogue going on is really not very polite. Minister.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And I have given way to the Honourable Lady once already, and I have been generous with my time. And I'm not going to give way one more time. I have given way once before, as I promised I would. I also gave way to the honourable gentleman too. So let's now, Madam Deputy Speaker, we should be proud of the remarkable progress that we have made on PPE. We are now in a position where we are confident we have enough stock to cover all future demands arising from COVID-19. The Right Honourable Lady mentioned some figures in relation to storage costs. I'm pleased to say they are now significantly reduced, and I'll write to the Honourable Lady with those the costs of storing that PPE here in the UK. Moreover, we've strengthened our country's PPE supply chain for the long term, including manufacturing more PPE here in the UK. Before the pandemic, as I said, Madam Deputy Speaker, at the beginning of this speech, just 1% of our PPE was produced here. Now the government has awarded contracts with around 30 manufacturers for the supply of almost 4 billion items of PPE. Now, we have learnt many lessons, Madam Deputy Speaker, from this pandemic. And when it comes to PPE, we are in a stronger footing today than ever before. But the successes of our enormous national effort at a time of unprecedented national crisis deserve to be recognised. People from all walks of life came together to protect people in the NHS and social care, and in doing so, they saved lives. Even as we continue to learn and build a system fit for the future, this government will remain enormously proud of everything that was achieved.